Case 1. The Nola Dinkins Case. 911. What's your emergency? My baby. Someone took my baby. A white man with a gun. He just pulled up in an SUV and snatched her right out of my car. Please, you have to find her. The voice on that call belonged to Darian Randall. The date, June 10th, 2025. The location, a shopping plaza in Newark, Delaware. And the child she claimed was abducted, her 3-year-old daughter, Nola Dinkins. Within minutes, an Amber Alert screamed across every phone in Delaware, then Maryland, then beyond. Police agencies mobilized: Delaware State Police, Maryland State Police, local departments, the FBI, helicopters, K-9 units, roadblocks. Everyone was looking for a little girl in pigtails, last seen wearing a pink shirt. But here's the thing: an Amber Alert, a mother's desperate plea. A child vanished in seconds. But what if the biggest monster wasn't the kidnapper, but the person who made the call? Randall stood in that parking lot, tears streaming down her face, hands shaking as she told the story again and again. A masked man, white, 30s, maybe 40s. Dark SUV, she thinks it was a Chevy. He had a gun, pointed it right at her, told her not to move, reached into the back seat and grabbed Nola, gone in seconds. It was every parent's nightmare, and the entire mid-Atlantic region stopped to help. Before we go any further, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. But while search teams combed the highways, detectives did what detectives do. They pulled surveillance footage from the plaza, from nearby businesses, from traffic cams on Route 40 and I-95. And that's when the cracks started to show. No white SUV, no man with a gun, no screeching tires, no abduction. The timestamps didn't match. Randall's car sat in that lot longer than she claimed. She was alone when she arrived, alone when she left. And Nola? She wasn't in the car at all. Detectives started working backward. Randall was a Maryland resident, Cecil County. If Nola wasn't taken in Delaware, where was she? And who else knew? Enter Cedric Antoine Britton, Randall's boyfriend. A 1-year-old man living in a worn-down rental in northeast Maryland, a tiny blue-collar town where everyone knows everyone's business. Britton wasn't talking, not at first, but investigators had phone records, text messages, and pressure. By the early hours of June 11th, less than 24 hours after the Amber Alert went out, Britton cracked. He told them where to look. A vacant lot, overgrown grass, rusted fence, a suitcase half hidden in the weeds. Maryland State Police approached it like a bomb, slowly, carefully, and when they unzipped it, they found what they already feared. Nola Dinkins, 3 years old, wrapped in plastic, cold, gone. One detective later told reporters, "I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen a lot. But finding that little girl, knowing her own mother put her there, that's something you don't forget." So what really happened? According to charging documents and Randall's own confession, this is the truth. It started in Maryland, not Delaware. Days earlier, maybe longer, Randall and Nola were alone. An argument, if you can even call it that, with a 3-year-old. Nola was acting out, crying, not listening. So Randall grabbed a belt, and she hit her 15 times, maybe 20, hard enough to bruise, hard enough to break, hard enough that Nola stopped breathing. Randall claims she tried CPR, but she never called 911, never called for help, never gave that little girl a fighting chance. Instead, she put Nola's body in a suitcase, drove to Britton's place in Cecil County, and together they worked on covering it up. Inside Britton's vehicle, investigators found a child's blanket, soaked in blood. In the trash and around the house, gloves, disinfectant wipes, cleaning chemicals. They weren't just hiding a body, they were erasing evidence. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's Ring camera showed Randall leaving the house with Nola hours before the fake 911 call. When she returned, Nola wasn't with her, but the suitcase was. And then, Randall drove to Delaware, parked in that plaza, took a breath, and dialed 911. She lied to dispatchers, lied to cops, lied to the public. She weaponized the one system designed to save missing children, turning an Amber Alert into a smokescreen for murder. Darian Randall was arrested in Delaware and extradited to Maryland. She's now charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, first-degree child abuse resulting in death, false reporting, evidence tampering. Cedric Britton faces charges as an accessory after the fact to murder, child abuse, and failure to report a death. He didn't kill Nola, but he helped hide her, and in the eyes of the law, that makes him guilty too. At a bond hearing, the judge denied bail for both. Randall sat stone-faced. Britton stared at the floor. Neither said a word. Outside the courthouse, prosecutors made it clear. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was premeditated concealment. This was calculated cruelty. And Nola paid the price. Nola Dinkins was 3 years old. She liked cartoons. She loved mac and cheese. She had her whole life ahead of her. But on June 10th, 2025, the world got an Amber Alert for a child who was already gone, and the person who should have protected her was the one who took her life. Trust is a fragile thing. One lie can shatter a system built to save lives. If this case shook you, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. Case 2, the Zona Bird case. October 2024. East Baltimore. A narrow row house on Aiken Street, wedged between a dozen others just like it. Cracked sidewalks, boarded up windows down the block. The kind of neighborhood where people mind their business until they can't anymore. An aunt hadn't heard from the family in days. Phone calls went unanswered, text messages left unread. Something felt off. So she drove over, knocked on the door, and when no one answered, she let herself in. What she found would haunt her forever. Upstairs in a back bedroom, on a bare, stained mattress, lay a little girl, cold to the touch. Skin stretched tight over bone, eyes sunken, lips cracked. She looked like something out of a horror film, except this wasn't fiction. This was Zona Bird, 5 years old, and she weighed 17.5 pounds. Let that sink in. 17.5 pounds. That's the size of an average 18-month-old baby. Zona was 5. The aunt screamed, called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. Zona had been dead for hours, maybe longer. The medical examiner would later determine she died of malnutrition and neglect. Not from disease, not from an accident, from starvation. Slow, prolonged, agonizing starvation. But here's the part that makes your stomach turn. The house had food, frozen meat in the freezer, canned goods stacked in the cabinets, boxes of cereal, bags of rice, bread, juice, snacks. Some of it was locked in the parents' bedroom. This wasn't poverty. This wasn't a family struggling to put food on the table. This was deliberate deprivation. This was cruelty with a key. Baltimore homicide detectives and Child Protective Services flooded the scene. What they discovered inside that row house was a chamber of horrors. Zona's 6-year-old brother was found in another room, malnourished, weak, barely able to stand. Investigators say he'd been scavenging through trash cans in the house, trying to find anything edible, scraps, crumbs, anything. He was so frail, officers had to carry him out. Other siblings, younger, older, showed signs of neglect too. Dirty clothes, untreated infections, developmental delays. All of them were removed from the home immediately and placed in emergency foster care. And the parents? Bernice Bird and Gerald Bird sat in the living room as police tore through their house, stone-faced, offering no explanation. Now, If you're wondering how it got this bad, how a 5-year-old child could starve to death in a house full of food while living with 2 parents, you're asking the right question. Because this wasn't Gerald and Bernice's first brush with the system. What time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. In 2019, Gerald Byrd was arrested and charged with second-degree assault after he tried to stab another one of his daughters. Not Zona, a different child. He actually pleaded guilty. Did a short jail stint, barely enough to call it time, then got probation. That case should have been a flashing red light, a siren, a 5-alarm fire for Child Protective Services. But somehow, some way, the Byrds got their kids back. Caseworkers came and went. Boxes were checked. Forms were filed. The system moved on, and Zona paid the price. Charging documents paint a picture of systematic abuse. Zona and her brother were singled out, isolated, denied food while the rest of the household ate, kept in rooms away from the others, told they were bad, told they didn't deserve to eat. Bernice, the mother, allegedly enforced the starvation. Gerald, the father, did nothing to stop it. In the eyes of the law, that makes them both killers. Both were arrested and charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and first-degree child abuse resulting in death. They were held without bond. Prosecutors came at them hard, offered a plea deal in early 2025, 60 years, a generation behind bars. It was a gift, frankly, considering the charges. They rejected it, both of them. No remorse, no admission, no accountability. So now they're headed to trial, and prosecutors are ready to show a jury everything. The photos of Zona's body, the food in the house, the brother in the trash, the 2019 stabbing, the missed red flags. The defense will likely argue mental illness, poverty, overwhelmed parents, but the state's got receipts. Frozen chicken in the freezer, canned soup in the pantry, food stamps on record. Zona didn't starve because there was no food. She starved because she was denied it. This case has become a flashpoint in Maryland, especially in Baltimore, where the child welfare system is already under fire. Tens of thousands of maltreatment referrals come in every year. Caseworkers are drowning. Kids fall through the cracks. Families who shouldn't have custody get it back. Families who need help don't get it in time. Zona Byrd is a name now, a statistic that never should have been. Advocates have called for investigations into how the Byrds were allowed to keep their children after 2019. How many visits did caseworkers make? What did they see? What did they ignore? The answers are murky. The records incomplete. The accountability non-existent. And meanwhile, Zona's brother, the one found scavenging in the trash, is in foster care now, trying to recover. Physically, he's improving. Emotionally, that's going to take years, maybe a lifetime. He'll have to live with the memory of watching his sister waste away, of being powerless to help her, of being hungry, so hungry, in a house full of food he wasn't allowed to touch. Bernice and Gerald Byrd are awaiting trial as of now. If convicted on all counts, they're looking at life without parole. Maryland doesn't have the death penalty anymore, but this case has some people wishing it did. The trial will be brutal. The evidence will be damning. And the question everyone will be asking is the same one we're asking now. How did we let this happen? How did a 5-year-old girl starve to death in 2024? In a major American city, in a house that had food, with parents who had a violent history, under the watch of a system that's supposed to protect children? Zona Byrd should be in kindergarten right now, learning to read, playing with friends, eating snacks, living. Instead, she's a cautionary tale, a failure, a ghost. Sometimes the cruelest prisons have no bars. Case 3. The Isolation Chamber. May 10th, 2022. Montgomery Village, Maryland. A quiet suburban neighborhood in Montgomery County, about 30 minutes outside D.C. Tree-lined streets, neat lawns, the kind of place where kids ride bikes and neighbors wave. At 6:47 a.m., a 911 call comes in from a single-family home on a cul-de-sac. A woman's voice, calm but strained, reports that her 17-year-old daughter is unresponsive. Paramedics arrive within minutes. They knock, the door opens, and what they walk into stops them cold. The smell hits first. Rot, waste, something sour and wrong. Inside, the house is a maze of clutter trash piled waist-high in some rooms, broken furniture shoved against walls, animal feces smeared on the floor. The bathrooms don't work. The sinks are clogged. Insects crawl along the baseboards. And in the living room, on a filthy blanket on the floor, lies a teenage girl. She weighs 79 pounds. 17 years old, 79 pounds. Her body is skeletal. Her skin clings to bone. Sores cover her arms and legs. Her hair is matted. Her eyes are half open, vacant. The paramedics check for a pulse. Nothing. She's been dead for hours. The medical examiner would later determine she died from complications of chronic neglect, malnutrition, untreated infections, pneumonia. Her body had simply given up. But this girl didn't die alone in some forgotten corner of the world. She died in a home with 2 parents, in a home with 7 siblings. In a home in Montgomery Village, Maryland, in the year 2022, her name has been withheld to protect her surviving siblings, but her story demands to be told. Montgomery County Police and Child Protective Services swept the house. What they found was a horror show. 7 other children, all minors, living in the same squalor, malnourished, covered in sores, scabs, and rashes. Some couldn't speak clearly. Others flinched when officers came near. None of them were in school. None had seen a doctor in years. They'd been isolated, trapped, hidden from the world. The parents, Cynthia Moore and Dominique Moore, stood in the kitchen as investigators moved through their home. They offered no resistance, no panic, no grief. When detectives asked why the 17-year-old hadn't been taken to a hospital, Cynthia's answer was chilling. We were praying for her. Prayer, not medicine, not a doctor, not 911 until it was far too late. As the investigation deepened, a picture emerged, one of religious extremism twisted into something monstrous. Family members who'd been estranged for years told police that Cynthia and Dominique had drifted into an increasingly extreme belief system. They spoke about demons, about spiritual warfare, about their children being possessed or corrupted by outside influences. They stopped sending the kids to school, stopped taking them to doctors, cut off contact with relatives, churches, even other homeschooling families. The children were kept inside, day after day, year after year, with little interaction with the outside world. The 17-year-old had multiple sclerosis and diabetes conditions that required regular medical care, medication, monitoring. Instead, her parents prayed over her, anointed her with oil, rebuked the demons they believed were afflicting her, and they watched her waste away. Relatives said they tried to intervene, tried to visit, but Cynthia and Dominique shut them out, blocked their calls, told them the kids were fine, that God was in control, that faith was all they needed. Faith became their fortress, and inside that fortress children suffered. Both parents were arrested and charged with second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and 6 counts of child neglect, 1 for each surviving child. The state argued this wasn't just neglect. It was a slow, deliberate killing. The parents had the means to save their daughter. They chose not to. That, prosecutors said, made it murder. Dominique Moore took a plea deal in late 2024. He pleaded guilty to 6 counts of child neglect. The murder and manslaughter charges were dropped. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Cynthia Moore refused to plead. She went to trial. Her defense team argued she genuinely believed prayer would heal her daughter. That she wasn't criminally negligent, she was faithful, misguided perhaps, but not malicious. The prosecution painted a different picture. They showed photos of the home, medical records documenting the daughter's deteriorating condition, testimony from relatives who begged Cynthia to get help, text messages in which Cynthia dismissed doctors as tools of the devil. They put the surviving children on the stand. One by one, they described what life was like in that house. The hunger, the isolation, the fear. Watching their sister get sicker and sicker while their mother knelt beside her, praying, refusing to call for help. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They acquitted Cynthia Moore of second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. The state couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that timely medical intervention would have definitely saved the girl's life. Her conditions were severe, and expert witnesses disagreed on prognosis. But the jury convicted her on all 6 counts of child neglect. And the judge was not gentle. Judge Jill Cummins presided over the sentencing in early 2025. She called it one of the worst neglect cases Montgomery County had ever seen. She sentenced Cynthia Moore to 30 years in prison, with all but 21 years suspended, followed by 5 years of probation. Effectively, 21 years behind bars. From the bench, Judge Cummins looked directly at Cynthia and said something that cut through the courtroom like a blade. You watched your daughter die. Not an accident, not a tragedy, a choice. Cynthia sat expressionless. No tears, no apology. Even then, those who were present said she seemed to believe she'd done nothing wrong. The surviving children were placed in foster care. Some have been adopted. Others are still in the system, undergoing therapy, learning to navigate a world they were kept from for so long. One caseworker described them as emotionally frozen, struggling to understand why their parents let their sister die, why they were kept inside, why no one came to help sooner. Neighbors told reporters they had no idea. The house looked fine from the outside, curtains drawn, sure, but nothing alarming, no screams, no obvious signs. That's the thing about isolation. It's quiet, it's invisible, until it's too late. Faith can heal, but it can also become a weapon. Case 4, Lothian Love Triangle Murders. October 5th, 2015, Lothian, Maryland. A small, unincorporated community in Anne Arundel County, halfway between Annapolis and the Chesapeake Bay. Farmland, back roads, houses set far apart. The kind of place where people come for privacy. Anne Arundel County Police respond to a 911 call from a woman reporting that she came home and found her husband dead in their bedroom. She sounds shaken, frantic. Says she's been out running errands and just walked in to find him. Officers arrive at the single-family home on a quiet street. Anne Anastasi meets them at the door, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Inside, upstairs in the master bedroom, they find Anthony Anastasi Jr., 40 years old, lying in bed, single gunshot wound to the head. A .45 caliber handgun rests near his body. At first glance, it looks like suicide, but something feels off. Then they go to the basement, and that's where they find Jacqueline Riggs, 25 years old, lying in a pool of blood, stabbed, slashed, over and over and over. 43 wounds, 20 stab wounds, 23 cuts and slashes, defensive wounds on her hands and arms. She fought. Hard. This was personal. This was rage. 2 bodies. 2 very different deaths. And a wife upstairs claiming she just got home. Detectives start asking questions. Who was Jacqueline Riggs? Why was she living in the basement? Anne Anastasi has an answer, and it's not what anyone expected. Jacqueline was their girlfriend. Not a roommate, not a tenant, their girlfriend. Anne and Anthony had been in a polyamorous relationship with Jacqueline for years, starting back when they lived in Michigan. When the Anastasis moved to Maryland, Anthony invited Jacqueline to come with them, set her up in the basement. She had her own space, her own life, but she was part of the family. At first, Anne says, it was consensual. Everyone was happy. It worked. But over time, things shifted. Anthony spent more and more time with Jacqueline, talked about having a baby with her, started treating her less like a secondary partner and more like a replacement. Anne felt humiliated, disrespected, pushed aside in her own home. She told friends and family that Anthony was controlling, that he manipulated her into the arrangement, that she felt trapped. But instead of leaving, she planned something else. Detectives pull phone records, text messages, and the picture becomes crystal clear. Anne didn't just find her husband dead. She orchestrated his murder, and she recruited her 13-year-old daughter's boyfriend to do it. Gabriel Ezekiel Struss, 18 years old, dating Anne's teenage daughter, a kid who should have been worried about high school, not homicide. Anne groomed him, told him Anthony was abusive, told him Jacqueline was a threat to the family, painted herself as a victim who needed saving. She gave him a .380 handgun, told him exactly what to do, and in the early morning hours of October 5th, Gabriel Struss walked into that house and became a killer. First, he went upstairs. Anthony was asleep in bed, one shot to the head, quick, quiet. Then he went to the basement. Jacqueline was awake. Maybe she heard something, maybe she sensed it, but she didn't have time to run. Gabriel attacked her with a knife. She fought back, screamed, tried to protect herself, but he kept going, stabbing, slashing, again and again and again. By the time he stopped, Jacqueline Riggs was unrecognizable. Anne was waiting upstairs. She staged the bedroom, placed the .45 caliber handgun next to Anthony's body to make it look like he shot himself, wiped down surfaces, got her story straight. Then she left the house, drove around for a while, and came back to discover the bodies. But Anne Anastasi wasn't as smart as she thought. Forensics tore her story apart in less than 48 hours. The bullet in Anthony's head was a .380 round. The gun next to his body was a .45. Completely different caliber. Physically impossible for that gun to have fired that bullet. Gunshot residue was found on Anne's hands and clothing, even though she claimed she never touched a weapon. Blood spatter patterns in the basement didn't match a single attacker. There were signs of staging throughout the house. And then there were the text messages. Between Anne and Gabriel, between Anne and her daughter, planning, coordinating, discussing how to make it look like self-defense or suicide, how juveniles get lighter sentences, how the system could be manipulated. Anne had even told her daughter that if things went south, the girl could take the blame because she was 13, and the courts would go easy on her. That's the kind of mother Anne Anastasi was. Gabriel Struss was arrested within days. He confessed, told investigators everything, how Anne manipulated him, how she provided the weapons, how she convinced him Anthony and Jacqueline had to die. Anne was arrested shortly after. She denied everything at first, then changed her story, then tried to claim she was a battered woman who had no choice. But the evidence didn't lie. Anne's 13-year-old daughter was charged in juvenile court. Her case was handled separately, sealed from public record. She avoided adult sentencing, but her involvement is part of the record. Gabriel Struss pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Anne Anastasi fought the charges, tried to go to trial, but her lawyers knew they couldn't win. In 2016, she entered an Alford plea, a legal move where the defendant doesn't admit guilt but acknowledges the state has enough evidence to convict. She pleaded to 2 counts of first-degree murder and a firearm charge. In 2017, Anne Anastasi was sentenced to 60 years in prison. At her age, it's effectively a life sentence. She'll die behind bars. At sentencing, prosecutors laid it out clearly. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't self-defense. This was premeditated, cold-blooded murder. Anne used a teenager as a weapon. She manipulated her own daughter. She destroyed 2 lives and tried to walk away clean. Anthony Anastasi Jr. thought he was building a non-traditional family. Jacqueline Riggs thought she'd found a place to belong. Instead, they walked into a trap set by a woman who couldn't handle rejection. Anne wanted control. When she lost it, she took everything. Consent can turn into control, and control can turn into murder. Case 5. Murder for hire of Ray Porter. March 1st, 2010. Just after midnight, a Hess gas station off Route 40 inches, Harford County, Maryland. The kind of place that does steady business truckers, late-night commuters, locals grabbing cigarettes and coffee on their way home from the bar. Ray Porter, 48 years old, co-owner of the station, was working the overnight shift. It wasn't unusual. He and his wife Carla owned the place together, and Ray was the kind of guy who didn't mind getting his hands dirty, stocking shelves, running the register, keeping the place clean. Around 1:30 a.m., a customer pulls up and finds the door locked. Lights are on inside, but no one's at the counter. He peers through the glass and sees something that makes his stomach drop. Ray Porter is on the floor behind the counter, blood pooling around his head. The customer calls 911. Harford County Sheriff's deputies arrive within minutes. They find Ray deceased. Single gunshot wound to the head. The register is open. A small amount of cash is missing, maybe $50-$60. Drawers pulled out. A few items knocked over. At first glance, it looks like a robbery gone wrong. But detectives have seen a lot of robberies, and something about this one doesn't sit right. The missing cash is too little. Most station robberies, the perp cleans out, the register takes everything. This looks half-hearted, staged. There's no sign of a struggle. Ray wasn't tied up, wasn't beaten, just shot, execution style, and left. And the security footage? Conveniently, the cameras weren't working that night. Detectives start building a timeline. Who had access to the station? Who knew Ray's schedule? Who stood to benefit from his death? The answer comes faster than anyone expected. Carla Porter, Ray's wife, puts on a performance for the ages. She shows up at the scene in hysterics, sobbing, wailing, collapsing into the arms of deputies. She gives interviews to local news, tears streaming, talking about what a good man Ray was, how much she loved him, how she can't believe someone would do this. She plays the grieving widow like she was born for the role. But behind the scenes, detectives are digging, and they find out Carla had taken out life insurance policies on Ray. Multiple policies, totaling somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000. That's motive. Then they find Walter Bishop. Walter Bishop, 61 years old, a handyman with a long rap sheet and ties to Carla's extended family. Detectives bring him in for questioning, and under pressure, Bishop cracks. He confesses, says Carla approached him months earlier, asked if he knew anyone who could take care of her husband. Eventually, she asked him directly, offered him money, a used pickup truck, and $400 cash. $400, a beat-up truck, and a man's life. Bishop admits he recruited his son, Kendall, and a nephew to help. They planned it, waited for Ray to be alone at the station, walked in, shot him, staged the robbery, walked out. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was a hit, paid for by the victim's wife. Carla is arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation to commit murder. The evidence is damning. Bishop's confession, phone records, financial records showing Carla's mounting debts and the life insurance policies. Testimony from people who say Carla had been talking about Ray's death for months. But Carla's defense team has a strategy. They argue battered spouse syndrome. They paint Ray as controlling, abusive, violent. They say Carla lived in fear for years, that she felt she had no other option, that hiring someone to kill him was an act of desperation, not greed. The jury hears it all. In 2013, they convict Carla Porter of first-degree murder. She's sentenced to life in prison. Case closed. Except it's not. What's the weather like where you are? Sunny? Rainy? Let me know. Carla's defense attorneys appeal. They argue the trial judge gave faulty jury instructions regarding battered spouse syndrome, that the jury wasn't properly guided on how to weigh evidence of abuse when considering intent and premeditation. And in a stunning move, Maryland's appellate court agrees. In 2015, Carla Porter's conviction is vacated, overturned. She's granted a new trial. It's a legal technicality, not a declaration of innocence, but it gives her a second chance. The state isn't backing down. Prosecutors retry the case in 2017. Same evidence, same witnesses, same confession from Walter Bishop, same life insurance policies, same $400 in a pickup truck. The defense leans even harder into the battered spouse narrative. They bring in expert witnesses, testimony from friends who say Carla seemed afraid of Ray, medical records showing old injuries Carla claims Ray caused. But the prosecution counters with a simple, devastating timeline. If Carla was so terrified, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she call the police? Why didn't she file for divorce? Instead, she took out life insurance. She recruited a hitman. She planned his death, and after he was killed, she collected the money. That's not survival. That's murder for profit. The second jury deliberates for less than a day. They convict Carla Porter again. First-degree murder. This time, the sentence sticks. Life in prison, with parole effectively out of reach. Walter Bishop gets decades behind bars. His son Kendall is also convicted in connection with the murder. The nephew cooperates with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. But it's Carla everyone remembers, because she almost got away with it, twice. Her story raises uncomfortable questions. Can someone be both a victim and a killer? Can years of abuse justify premeditated murder? Where's the line between self-defense and revenge? The law has an answer. Self-defense requires imminent threat. Carla wasn't in imminent danger the night Ray was killed. She wasn't in the room. She wasn't holding the gun. She was miles away, waiting for a phone call to tell her it was done. That's not self-defense. That's conspiracy. And the courts agreed. But Carla's case became a flashpoint in discussions about domestic violence, coercive control, and how the legal system handles battered defendants who kill. Some advocates argue she deserved leniency. Others say she weaponized the language of victimhood to justify cold-blooded murder. Ray Porter's family says the truth is simple. He wasn't perfect. Maybe he wasn't even a good husband. But he didn't deserve to be executed for $400 in a pickup truck so his wife could cash in on $500,000. Carla Porter sits in a Maryland prison today. She's maintained her innocence, says she was scared, says she had no choice, says the system failed her. But the system didn't put a bullet in Ray Porter's head. She did, through Walter Bishop, through calculation, through greed. Victimhood can be real. It can also be a costume. We're halfway through Maryland's darkest partnerships. Like this video if you're still with me. Case 6. Chainsaw Matricide. Candace Craig. May 23, 2023. Landover, Maryland, Prince George's County. A residential neighborhood not far from FedEx Field, where the Washington Commanders play. Working class. Modest homes. Families who've lived there for decades. Inside one of those homes, a confrontation is about to turn deadly. Margaret Craig, 71 years old, retired federal worker, sits at her kitchen table going through her bank statements. Something's been off for months. Charges she didn't make. Withdrawals she didn't authorize. Money disappearing from her pension account. Her Social Security checks rerouted. She's been tracking it, and now she knows exactly who's been stealing from her. Her daughter, Candace Craig, 44 years old, unemployed, living in Margaret's house rent-free. Margaret confronts her, asks her point blank, Did you steal my credit cards? Did you drain my accounts? How could you do this to me? Candace doesn't deny it. She's been caught. The evidence is right there in black and white. And instead of apologizing, instead of trying to make it right, Candace snaps. She grabs her mother, wraps her hands around Margaret's throat, and squeezes. Margaret fights, claws, tries to scream, but Candace is younger, stronger, and fueled by rage and desperation. Within minutes, it's over. Margaret Craig is dead on her kitchen floor, strangled by her own daughter. And that's when the real horror begins. Candace doesn't call 911, doesn't turn herself in, doesn't have a breakdown or moment of clarity. She drags her mother's body into another room, covers it with blankets, and tries to figure out what to do next. For days, Margaret's body lies in that house. The temperature climbs, decomposition sets in. The smell, thick, sour, unmistakable, starts to fill the rooms. Neighbors notice. Ask Candace if something's wrong, if there's a gas leak, maybe a dead animal in the walls. Candace smiles, says everything's fine, just some plumbing issues. She's handling it. But the smell gets worse, and Candace realizes she can't just leave the body there. So she enlists help. Her 19-year-old daughter, Salia Hardy, Margaret's granddaughter. Prosecutors would later say Candace manipulated Salia, told her they'd both go to prison if anyone found out, told her they had no choice, that they had to protect each other. So together, in the basement of that Landover home, Candace and Salia dismembered Margaret Craig's body. They used an electric chainsaw. Let that image sit with you for a second. A mother and daughter, in a basement, cutting up the body of the woman who raised them both. The chainsaw was loud, messy. Blood and tissue sprayed the walls, the floor, their clothes, but they kept going. When they were done, they tried to dispose of the remains. First, they attempted to burn pieces on a barbecue grill in the backyard. Neighbors saw smoke, smelled something awful. But Candace waved them off, said she was just burning old trash. The grill didn't work. Human tissue doesn't burn like wood or paper. It smolders, it stinks, and it leaves evidence. So they tried other methods, bagging parts, hiding them around the house, attempting to burn more in makeshift containers. All the while, Candace kept using Margaret's credit cards, kept withdrawing money from her accounts, kept cashing her Social Security checks. Margaret's friends and relatives tried calling, texting, no response. Candace would answer Margaret's phone occasionally, make excuses, say she's not feeling well, say she's resting, say she'll call back later. But Margaret never called back. By late May, family members were worried. By early June, they were panicking. They contacted Prince George's County Police and requested a welfare check. On June 2, 2023, officers arrived at the Landover home. Candace answered the door. Calm, cooperative, said her mother was out, said she'd be back soon. But the officers smelled it immediately. That smell, the one you can't mistake once you've smelled it before. Death. They asked to come inside. Candace hesitated, then stepped aside. What they found in that house is the stuff of nightmares. In the basement, bags containing human tissue, blood splattered on the walls and floor, bone fragments, an electric chainsaw, still stained, sitting on a workbench. In the backyard, evidence of burning. Melted plastic, charred organic material that field tests would later confirm as human remains. Inside the house, Margaret's purse, her phone, her medication, all the things she'd never leave behind if she'd actually gone somewhere. Candace Craig was arrested on the spot. Salia Hardy was taken into custody shortly after. The medical examiner pieced together enough of Margaret's remains to determine cause of death: asphyxiation, strangulation, and the dismemberment happened post-mortem. A small mercy, if you can call it that. Candace was charged with first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and a slew of financial crimes: identity theft, credit card fraud, theft of government benefits. Salia was charged as an accessory after the fact and with abuse of a corpse. Prosecutors made it clear they believed she was coerced, that Candace used her own daughter as a tool to cover up murder. Salia cooperated fully, told investigators everything: where the chainsaw was purchased, how her mother convinced her to help, how terrified she was the entire time. In exchange, she was offered a plea deal: probation, mandatory therapy, community service, no prison time. Candace, on the other hand, went to trial. Her defense tried to argue she acted in a moment of rage, that it wasn't premeditated, that the dismemberment was panic, not calculation. But prosecutors had receipts. Literally. They showed the jury Margaret's bank records, months of fraudulent charges, thousands of dollars stolen, life insurance policies Candace had taken out on her mother. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment killing. This was murder for money. And when Candace realized Margaret was about to turn her in, she killed her. The jury convicted Candace Craig on all counts. On February 19, 2025, in a Prince George's County courtroom, Judge Kevin J. Wiggins sentenced Candace Craig to life in prison without the possibility of parole. From the bench, Judge Wiggins spoke directly to her. His words were measured, but they hit like a hammer. What you did to your mother, the woman who gave you life, who provided for you, who allowed you to live in her home, is the ultimate betrayal of motherhood. You didn't just take her life. You erased her. You dismembered her. You tried to burn her like garbage. And you did it for money. Candace sat stone-faced. No tears, no remorse. Even as victim impact statements were read, Margaret's friends, her co-workers, her church family, all describing a kind, generous woman who didn't deserve what happened to her. Salia Hardy, now in her early 20s, is trying to rebuild her life. She's in therapy, trying to process the fact that her mother turned her into an accomplice to her grandmother's murder. Margaret Craig's friends have held memorials. They've planted trees in her name. They've tried to remember her as she was, not as what her daughter made her. But the image is hard to shake. A 71-year-old woman, killed in her own home, dismembered in her own basement, by the daughter she raised and the granddaughter she loved. Candace Craig stole Margaret's money. Then she stole her life. Then she tried to erase her entirely. She failed. Margaret's name is remembered. Her story is told. And Candace will spend the rest of her life behind bars, a living reminder of what greed can do. Greed doesn't just destroy trust, it destroys families. Case 7. Tropic Bay Water Gardens Murder, May 24th, 2025. Early evening, Davidsonville, Maryland. A quiet, semi-rural area in Anne Arundel County, known for horse farms, garden centers, and long stretches of road where you can drive for miles without seeing much but trees. Around 7:30 p.m., multiple 911 calls come in, reporting a truck fire in the parking lot of Tropic Bay Water Gardens, a local business that sells koi fish, pond supplies, water plants, and outdoor decor. It's been a fixture in the community for years. Firefighters from the Davidsonville Volunteer Fire Department arrive within minutes. Flames are pouring out of a pickup truck parked near the front of the building. They move fast, dousing it with water and foam, trying to keep it from spreading to nearby vehicles or the structure itself. As the smoke clears, one of the firefighters looks into the cab and freezes. There's a body inside, slumped in the passenger area, hands and arms bound with duct tape, mouth taped shut, partially burned, but unmistakably human. This isn't an accident. This is a crime scene. Anne Arundel County Police and homicide detectives swarm the scene. The fire is ruled suspicious immediately. Arson investigators find evidence of an accelerant gasoline. The strong smell lingers even after the flames are out. They recover fragments of a melted plastic gas container near the vehicle. The victim is identified as Edward Stephen Cosa, 67 years old, the owner of Tropic Bay Water Gardens. This is his business, his truck, his life, and someone set him on fire. The autopsy would later show that Cosa suffered blunt force trauma to the head before the fire started. He may have been unconscious when the flames began, maybe already dying, maybe not. Either way, it was brutal. Detectives canvass the area, interview employees, customers, neighbors. Was there a robbery? A dispute? Did Cosa have enemies? Nothing jumps out at first. He was well liked, a little gruff maybe, but fair, ran a good business, kept to himself. No obvious threats, no bad blood. But then investigators start pulling surveillance footage from nearby businesses. Gas stations, convenience stores, traffic cameras along Route 214. And that's when two faces keep showing up. A young man and a young woman, teenagers, maybe early 20s, driving a red Lincoln sedan, stopping at a BP gas station on West Central Avenue earlier that evening. The footage is clear enough to make out details. The young man is wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap with a Bass Pro Shops logo. The young woman goes inside the gas station and buys something. The young man stays outside, near the pump. They're putting gasoline into a red container. At the crime scene, investigators had found a Bass Pro Shops cap near Cosa's truck. Same style, same logo. That's not a coincidence. Detectives run the license plate on the red Lincoln. It comes back to Jonah Michael Poole, 18 years old, from Davidsonville. Same town, same area. They identify the young woman as Kylie Alyssa Dakes, also 18, from nearby Harwood. Within 48 hours, both are arrested and charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, first- and second-degree assault, conspiracy to commit murder, and arson. The evidence is damning. Surveillance footage places them at the gas station buying gasoline around the time of the murder. The Bass Pro cap ties Poole to the scene. Cell phone data puts both of them in the area of Tropic Bay Water Gardens that evening. Inside the business, investigators find signs of a struggle. Overturned displays, broken items, blood spatter. It looks like Cosa was attacked inside, maybe tried to fight back, and was then dragged or forced into his own truck. They bound his hands and mouth, beat him, poured gasoline over him in the vehicle, and lit it. Then they drove away in the red Lincoln, leaving him to burn. But here's the part that haunts everyone involved in this case. Nobody knows why. Detectives have dug into Poole's background. He'd worked at Tropic Bay briefly about a year earlier. Just a short stint, nothing remarkable. No complaints, no drama. He left on seemingly okay terms. Was there bad blood? A grudge? Did Cosa fire him and Poole held on to it? Maybe. But there's no evidence of that. No threatening messages, no arguments, no history of conflict. Dakes had no connection to Cosa at all. Never worked there, never shopped there, didn't know him. So what was the motive? Robbery? There's no sign that anything of significant value was taken. The business wasn't ransacked. Cosa's wallet was still in his pocket. A thrill kill? Some kind of twisted dare? Investigators have asked. Poole and Dakes aren't talking. Their lawyers have advised silence, and so far, neither has offered an explanation. Prosecutors say the evidence speaks for itself. Premeditation, conspiracy, the purchase of gasoline, the cap left at the scene, the surveillance footage. They don't need a motive to prove murder, but it would sure help a jury understand. As of now, both are awaiting trial. If convicted, they're looking at life in prison. Poole has also been linked to a prior burglary at a local restaurant called Pirates Cove, suggesting a pattern of escalating criminal behavior. But even that doesn't explain why he and Dakes targeted Edward Cosa. The community is still reeling. Tropic Bay Water Gardens has remained closed since the murder. Flowers and handwritten notes have been left outside the front gate. People who knew Cosa describe him as a hard worker, A guy who loved fish and ponds and helping customers design their dream backyard water features. He didn't deserve this. Nobody does. But especially not like this. Bound, beaten, burned alive in his own truck in his own parking lot by two teenagers who may never explain why. That's the thing about some crimes. You can solve them. You can arrest the suspects, gather the evidence, build the case. You can get a conviction, hand down a sentence, lock them away for life. But you can't always answer the one question everyone wants answered. Why? Why Edward Cosa? Why that night? Why that way? Jonah Poole and Kylie Dakes know, and they're not telling. Maybe they never will. Some violence has no logic, only cruelty. Case 8. The Delayed Homicide. Jose Zavala Marquez. September 10, 2023. Gaithersburg, Maryland, Montgomery County. A apartment complex on the 8,000 block of Shady Spring Drive, tucked in a residential area not far from I-270. Young professionals, families, people trying to make it work in the expensive D.C. suburbs. Inside one of those apartments, an argument is brewing between Jennifer Abigail Espinoza Orellana, 21, and her boyfriend, Jose Manuel Zavala Marquez, 20 years old. No one knows exactly what sparked it. Maybe money, maybe jealousy, maybe something small that spiraled. Witnesses would later say the couple had their ups and downs, that things could get heated, but nothing that seemed dangerous. Until that night, the argument moves into the kitchen. Voices get louder, things get physical, pushing, shoving, and then Jennifer grabs a kitchen knife. One thrust, straight into Jose's chest. The blade pierces his sternum, cuts through muscle, punctures his heart. Jose stumbles back. Blood spreads across his shirt. He's gasping, clutching his chest, trying to understand what just happened. This is the moment. The moment where Jennifer could call 911, could scream for help, could try to save him. She doesn't. Instead, she panics. Not the kind of panic that leads to action, the kind that leads to terrible decisions. She gets Jose into her car. He's barely conscious, bleeding, struggling to breathe. And instead of driving to the nearest hospital, there's one less than 10 minutes away. She drives to a relative's house, then to a park to meet someone else. Hours pass. Jose is dying in her passenger seat. His breathing gets shallow. His skin goes pale. He's fading. And Jennifer keeps driving. It's not until around 5:30 inches the morning hours after the stabbing that she finally brings him to Adventist Healthcare Shady Grove Medical Center. She pulls up to the emergency entrance, gets out, tells the staff she found him like this, that she doesn't know what happened, that he was stabbed and she just discovered him and brought him straight here. The doctors and nurses move fast. They get Jose onto a gurney, into a trauma bay, start working, but it's too late. Jose Manuel Zavala Marquez is pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The ER staff knows something's off. The timeline doesn't add up. The amount of blood loss, the condition of the body, the vague, contradictory story Jennifer is telling. They contact Montgomery County Police. Detectives arrive and start asking questions. Jennifer sticks to her story at first. She found him. She doesn't know who did it. She doesn't know where it happened. She just wanted to get him help. But detectives are trained to spot lies, and Jennifer's story is full of them. They go to her apartment on Shady Spring Drive. The scene tells a different story. Overturned items, blood on the kitchen floor, a knife, rinsed but not hidden, sitting in the sink. They bring Jennifer in for questioning, press her, walk her through the inconsistencies, show her the evidence. And she breaks. She admits it. She stabbed him. It was an argument. Things got out of control. She didn't mean to kill him. She panicked. She didn't know what to do. But here's the thing that makes this case so haunting. Doctors would later testify that if Jose had received immediate medical attention, if Jennifer had called 911 right away, there's a chance he could have survived. Not a guarantee. A stab wound to the heart is life-threatening no matter what. But with prompt treatment, with surgery, with a trauma team working on him within minutes instead of hours, he might have had a shot. Jennifer didn't give him that shot. She drove him around, wasted time, let him bleed out. And when she finally brought him to the hospital, it was far too late. That delay, that choice to cover her tracks instead of saving his life, turned what might have been a manslaughter case into something much worse. Jennifer Abigail Espinoza Orellana was charged with second-degree murder. Not first-degree, because prosecutors couldn't prove the stabbing itself was premeditated. It appeared to be a heat-of-the-moment act during a fight. But the hours that followed, that was a choice, a series of choices, and those choices killed Jose as surely as the knife did. The case went to trial in November 2024. Jennifer's defense argued it was a tragic accident, that she was scared, that she didn't realize how badly he was hurt, that she was young and panicked and made a terrible mistake. The prosecution painted a different picture. They showed the jury the timeline, the drive to the relative's house, the stop at the park, the hours of delay, the lies she told hospital staff and police. They argued that Jennifer knew exactly what she'd done, and instead of trying to save Jose, she tried to save herself. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty. Second-degree murder. On April 30th, 2025, Jennifer Espinoza Orellana stood before a Montgomery County judge for sentencing. The judge imposed 40 years in prison, with all but 18 years suspended, plus probation, effectively 18 years behind bars. Jose's family was in the courtroom. His mother read a victim impact statement describing a young man who was funny, kind, hardworking. A son who called home every week. A brother who looked out for his siblings. A man who had his whole life ahead of him. And he died alone, bleeding out in a car, while the woman who stabbed him drove in circles trying to figure out how to avoid consequences. Jennifer showed little emotion during sentencing. Her family cried. Jose's family cried. Everyone cried except her. 18 years. Some people think that's fair. Some think it's too much for a fight that went wrong. Others think it's not nearly enough for a woman who let her boyfriend die instead of calling for help. The law decided she's a murderer. The sentence reflects that. But the moral question lingers. If she'd called 911 right away, would Jose be alive today? We'll never know. What we do know is that Jennifer Espinoza Orellana made a choice, and that choice killed Jose Manuel Zavala Marquez. The cover-up can be deadlier than the crime. Drop a comment if you think the sentence was fair or if justice missed the mark. Case 9. The Caged Children of Carroll County. November 7th, 2014. Rural Carroll County, Maryland. Rolling hills. Farm country. Homes set back from the road with long gravel driveways. The kind of place where neighbors are few and privacy is easy to come by. Maybe too easy. Carroll County Sheriff's deputies, along with Child Protective Services, arrive at a single-family home near Westminster for a welfare check. Someone called in a concern. Didn't give a lot of detail, just said the kids at that house didn't seem right, that something felt wrong. The deputies knock. A man answers, Paul Trapani, mid-40s. He seems annoyed but lets them in. And what they walk into is something none of them will ever forget. The house is a disaster. Trash piled in corners, spoiled food rotting on counters, the stench of human waste thick in the air, flies buzzing, filth everywhere. But it's not the mess that stops them cold. It's the cages. In one room, 2 crude wooden enclosures built from plywood boards and chicken wire. They're not big, maybe 4 feet by 3 feet, not tall enough to stand in, barely large enough to lie down. And inside each one, a child. Both are young. One looks maybe 4, the other 5 or 6. It's hard to tell because they're so small, so underdeveloped. They're wearing soiled clothing, diapers that haven't been changed in who knows how long, shirts stained with food and waste. No blankets, no toys, no comfort of any kind. The cages have makeshift latches on the outside, locked from the outside. The children can't get out on their own. One of the deputies opens the door to the first cage. The child inside doesn't react like a normal kid would. No crying, no reaching out, just a blank, hollow stare. The officer tries to speak gently, but the child doesn't respond. Non-verbal, or maybe so traumatized that words don't come anymore. The second child is similar. When they open the cage, the child crawls out on all fours, doesn't stand, doesn't walk upright, moves like an animal who's been caged for so long they've forgotten how to be human. One investigator would later describe it as animal-like behavior, a term that would show up in court documents and media reports, sparking outrage and heartbreak across Maryland. These children had been locked in cages like pets. Worse than pets. At least a dog gets walked. At least a cat gets fed. The deputies move through the rest of the house. 4 more children, not caged but neglected in other ways, sleeping on bare, stained mattresses, surrounded by garbage, malnourished, dirty, hollow-eyed, scared. 6 children total. 6 lives trapped in hell. Paul Trapani and his wife, Melissa Trapani, are taken into custody on the spot. All 6 children are removed and placed in emergency foster care. The investigation reveals a pattern of severe, long-term neglect. The 2 youngest children, the ones in the cages, had been kept that way for an unknown period. Months, maybe longer. They weren't being taken to doctors, weren't in school, weren't registered anywhere. They were invisible. Medical exams show severe developmental delays, malnutrition, poor muscle tone from being confined, psychological trauma that would take years of therapy to even begin to unpack. The other 4 children, while not physically caged, were emotionally and mentally trapped. They described a home where there was no structure, no care, no love, where they were left to fend for themselves while their parents ignored them, or worse. Paul and Melissa Trapani were charged with multiple counts of child neglect and reckless endangerment. Prosecutors wanted to pursue felony child abuse charges, but under Maryland law at the time, they had to prove specific physical injury for each count. The neglect was obvious, but the legal threshold was harder to meet. Still, the evidence was overwhelming. Photos of the cages, photos of the children's condition, testimony from deputies, social workers, doctors. There was no defending what had happened in that house. Both parents were convicted. In 2018, they appeared before Judge Thomas Stansfield in Carroll County Circuit Court for sentencing. Judge Stansfield didn't mince words. He called it one of the most disturbing neglect cases he had ever seen in his career on the bench. He described the cages, the conditions, the utter disregard for the children's humanity. Paul and Melissa Trapani were each sentenced to 30 years in prison, 5 years per count of neglect, served consecutively. But a significant portion was suspended, and with parole eligibility, they were effectively facing about 10 years behind bars. Some advocates and community members felt it wasn't enough. 10 years for caging children, for stealing their childhood, for treating them like animals? But that was the law, that was the sentence. A 3-judge appellate panel later reviewed the case and denied their requests for sentence reduction. The 10 years would stand. The 6 children were placed in foster care. Some were eventually adopted into loving homes. Others remained in the system, undergoing therapy, learning how to trust, how to speak, how to exist outside of fear. The 2 who were caged had the hardest road. Years of being confined in small spaces left deep scars. They had to relearn basic motor skills, social interaction, emotional expression. Some of that damage may never fully heal. Paul and Melissa Trapani offered no real explanation, no apology, no accountability. They sat silent through most of the proceedings, showing little emotion. Maybe they didn't think they did anything wrong. Maybe they were too broken themselves to see the horror they inflicted. Either way, 6 children paid the price. Cages come in many forms. Some are made of wood, others are made of silence. Case 10. The Power Grid Conspiracy. This case is different. No intimate partners, no family betrayal, no greed or jealousy or crimes of passion. This one is about ideology, pure, cold, calculated hatred, and a plan to plunge an entire city into darkness. Brandon Clint Russell. If that name sounds familiar, it should. He's the co-founder of Atomwaffen Division, a neo-Nazi terrorist group responsible for multiple murders, threats, and plots across the United States. A group so extreme, so violent, that even other white supremacist organizations have distanced themselves from it. Russell had been in federal prison before, convicted in 2017 on explosives charges after authorities found bomb-making materials, Nazi propaganda, and a framed photo of Timothy McVeigh in his apartment in Florida. He served his time, got out, and immediately went back to plotting. Enter Sarah Beth Clendaniel, a Maryland woman in her 30s with a long criminal history, drug charges, theft, time in and out of prison. But by 2022, she had something else driving her. She was terminally ill, kidney failure, limited time left, and she wanted to make her mark, wanted to do something that would be remembered, something historic. So when she connected with Brandon Russell online through encrypted messaging platforms frequented by extremists, she found a kindred spirit, and together they began planning an attack on Baltimore's electrical infrastructure. The goal was simple and terrifying: create a cascading grid failure that would knock out power to hundreds of thousands of people, maybe more, cripple the city, cause chaos, death, panic. Russell had the knowledge. He'd studied electrical systems, explosives, infrastructure vulnerabilities. He knew which substations to hit, knew how to maximize damage, knew how to make the whole thing collapse like dominoes. Clendaniel had the will, and nothing to lose. From mid-2022 into early 2023, they communicated through encrypted apps, shared maps of substations around Baltimore and throughout central Maryland, discussed weapons, discussed timing, discussed how much destruction they could cause. Russell gave technical guidance where to shoot, how to disable transformers, which points would trigger the widest outages. He talked about turning off the lights for weeks, about hospitals losing power, about water systems failing, about winter cold or summer heat making it even worse. Clendaniel soaked it all in. She talked about wanting to leave a legacy, about wanting people to remember her name, about making the system feel pain. In one message, she said if they pulled it off, they could destroy this whole city. But they weren't as careful as they thought. The FBI had infiltrated their network. An undercover agent posing as a fellow extremist had gained their trust, was part of the conversations, saw the maps, heard the plans, documented everything. On February 3rd, 2023, federal agents moved in. Brandon Russell was arrested in Florida. Sarah Clendaniel was arrested in Maryland. Both were charged with conspiracy to destroy an energy facility, a federal crime that carries serious time. When the Department of Justice unsealed the complaint and held a press conference, the scope of the plot became public, and people were horrified. We're not talking about a robbery or a murder or even a mass shooting. We're talking about an attack on critical infrastructure, an attack designed to knock out power to potentially hundreds of thousands of people across Baltimore and beyond. Think about what that means. Hospitals on backup generators, hoping they don't fail, dialysis patients, unable to get treatment, elderly people in high-rises with no heat or air conditioning, traffic lights out, water treatment plants offline, grocery stores losing refrigeration, chaos in the streets. And for what? Ideology, hate, a delusional belief that causing mass suffering would somehow advance a white supremacist agenda. Russell and Clendaniel weren't Robin Hoods striking back against the powerful. They were terrorists targeting civilians, everyday people just trying to live their lives. The evidence was overwhelming. Maps with substations circled, detailed instructions from Russell on how and where to strike, messages discussing the attack timeline. Clendaniel expressed her eagerness to act before her illness took her. Both were held without bond. Both faced decades in federal prison. Sarah Clendaniel went first. She pleaded guilty in 2024 to conspiracy charges. At her sentencing hearing in September 2024, prosecutors emphasized the scale of what she intended to do, the lives that could have been lost, the damage that would have taken months to repair. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. 18 years for a woman who thought she'd be dead within a year or two. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She'll likely die behind bars, but at least she'll die without ever carrying out her plan. Brandon Russell fought longer, but eventually the weight of the evidence was too much. On August 7, 2025, in federal court in Maryland, Russell stood before Judge Theodore D. Chuang for sentencing. Prosecutors called him the intellectual engine of the plot. They detailed his history with Atomwaffen, his prior explosives, conviction, his technical expertise, his manipulation of Clendaniel, feeding her extremist ideology and using her desperation to further his agenda. Judge Chuang sentenced Brandon Russell to 20 years in federal prison, plus lifetime supervised release. He'll be monitored for the rest of his life after he gets out. Restricted from certain communications, certain devices, certain associations. The judge made it clear this wasn't just a conspiracy. This was domestic terrorism, and it would be treated as such. The FBI and federal prosecutors emphasized that if the plot had succeeded, it could have left hundreds of thousands of people without power for weeks. In the middle of winter or the height of summer, that's not just an inconvenience. That's life-threatening. People would have died, elderly, sick, vulnerable. People who rely on electricity for medical equipment, heating, cooling, refrigeration for medication. Russell and Clendaniel didn't care. That was the point. Maximum suffering, maximum chaos. But they failed. Because technology, the very kind of encrypted communication they thought would protect them, became the tool that brought them down. Ideology can be as deadly as any weapon. Before you go, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because Maryland's true crime history runs deeper than you think. 10 Ks, 20 killers, countless lives destroyed. We've walked through homes that became crime scenes, through lies that tore families apart, through cages, chainsaws, fire, and hate. Darian Randall weaponized an Amber Alert. Bernice and Gerald Bird locked food away while their daughter starved. Cynthia and Dominique Moore prayed while their child died. Ann Anastasi turned jealousy into murder and used her own daughter to pull it off. Carla Porter paid $400 for a hit. Candace Craig dismembered her mother for money. Jonah Poole and Kylie Dakes burned a man alive for reasons we still don't understand. Jennifer Espinoza Orellana let her boyfriend bleed out in a car instead of calling for help. Paul and Melissa Trapani built cages for their children. Brandon Russell and Sarah Clendaniel plotted to plunge a city into darkness. What ties them all together? Silence as complicity. Systems designed to protect, weaponized to harm, the home as the most dangerous place. And technology, sometimes the witness, sometimes the accomplice. These cases remind us that evil doesn't always look like a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it looks like a mother, a spouse, a neighbor, a believer. And the systems we trust, Amber Alerts, Child Protective Services, the courts, even faith can be twisted, exploited, and broken by the people who should uphold them. 10 cases, 20 killers, countless lives destroyed. The question isn't just who did this. It's how did we let it happen? What case shocked you most? Let me know in the comments. And remember, true crime isn't entertainment. It's a mirror.